I will call this meeting to order. And Brett, if you'd like to do roll call.
Well, Bill Rourke. Bill, can you check to see that you can unmute yourself? There you are.
I'm unmuted, present.
Present. DC Crichton, you're absent. Connie Woodbury.
Good evening.
Denise Bacon.
Sure.
Jeremiah Horton.
Present.
Leonard Rydell.
Yeah.
Merrill Kunkel.
Here.
Mike Googler. Absent. Peter Sedaris.
Here.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting that we saw?
I move they be approved.
Second.
All right.
I'm not seeing Doug on here. So
Do we need to wait for Doug, Brett?
we'll move forward.
Okay, so let's move on to new business. Brett, if you want to take it away from there.
Okay, tonight we have the.
Hold on, did you guys actually vote on approving the minutes?
Oh, thank you. My
Yes.
apologies.
Thank you.
I'm moving forward. My apologies. Yes, let's vote on approving the minutes. Everybody in favor, say aye.
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 Any nays? All in favor.
It's like unanimous.
Okay, now let's move on to new business.
So tonight we have the next piece of the master plan technical update presentation with Keller. This is information to kind of give you a status of where we're at in the process on the project there. So Emily, how do you take it from here?
Good evening. Thanks for everyone being here. I will share this screen. Can everyone see that all right? Great. So this is the second CAC for the wastewater master plan technical update. And a brief agenda of what we're going to go over today. I'm going to briefly go over the system update, which includes the study area, the infrastructure that was updated, as well as the loading. Then we'll touch on the planning criteria that was used for the system evaluation. And we'll talk about the updated system evaluation followed by next steps. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to jump in, interrupt me, and we'll talk about them. So system updates. Just a little bit of background. The basis of this model that we are updating is from the 2018 wastewater master plan. During that master plan, the invert elevations for all of the trunk lines were actually surveyed as an update for that master plan.
Can I interrupt a minute? Mike
Yes.
Google is trying to log in. He's been trying that for 25 minutes. Does somebody want to call him and walk him through it?
Who has been?
Mike Googler?
You want to give me his phone number and I'll call him?
Thank you. 503-476-7702.
Okay, I'll call him.
Thank you.
Brett, do you want me to pause for a moment to see if we can get Mike joined in the call before I keep going?
Please, let's pause for a bit here.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Leonard, were you talking about Mike Googler or Dan Denici?
Mike Kugler.
I just called that number you gave me and I got Dan Denich.
Well, that's interesting.
So Mike's number is 503-810-5576.
What was it again, so I can update my phone?
Let's see. It's 503-810-5576.
Thank you very much. That's funny, I have no trouble calling him. Oh, I gave you the, you're right, I did give you Dan's number. You're correct, it is 503-810-5576. Did he answer the phone?
Yeah, I'm on the phone with him. I'm working on it. Hold on.
Thank you.
Start
Unmute.
video.
And
All right.
Okay,
I'm hanging up now because otherwise we're echoing, Mike.
thank you, Karen.
Mike is on.
I am finally.
Hello, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Brett. Could we use soup cans with string?
I'm with you at times, Mike, for certain. The stuff.
I can make those work, but if I have the right buttons. Sorry about that. I'm on.
Okay. We'll have, Emily was just getting started with the wastewater information presentation here, so I'll have her continue.
All right, I'm ready. Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's fine. Glad we could get you on.
But yes,
So looking at just the system update, as I was saying, the base model that we're starting from is from the 2018 wastewater master plan. And the invert elevations were surveyed during that modeling effort. Flow monitoring was also completed in the system for model calibration of the 2018 model. And then model evaluation went through the whole master plan process, which involved a TAC as well as a CAC, and was reviewed with city staff to compare the staff's historical knowledge with the model. And so we are starting at the build out scenario of the 2018 master plan. And this figure just shows the study area is the urban growth boundary, which is this purple line. And all of the colored areas here show the growth areas that are included in this model. And this has been updated, the riverfront area down here in pink. And we'll go over these a little more detail in the next couple slides. But Crestview over here in the orange, both have been updated to reflect the updated information the city has received and provided for this update. So looking at the riverfront area first. So the River Run Subdivision is a subdivision. It's here in this light green that there are preliminary plans for, and it is within the riverfront master plan area. So the riverfront master plan area was updated to match the growth areas and the zoning designation that is recommended in the riverfront master plan. The sewer pipes, the master plan has horizontal alignments, and then we used contour data and minimum slopes recommended for pipes to look at the vertical alignments for these. And they're just preliminary master plan alignments. And I will note that, excuse me, the industrial line is actually modeled at a higher slope than the minimum slope, and that is because of keeping this manhole so that it's within about 10 feet from the ground rather than having like a 25-foot depth deep manhole, since typically you wouldn't want to build that deep if you don't have to. So just to note, and the loads for this area were updated using the 2018 master plan methodology, which uses average lot size per your zoning type with your people per dwelling unit. And then projected unit dry weather flows from the 2018 master plan. The inflow and infiltration, or in the model is known as the rainfall derived inflow and infiltration, RDII. That methodology matches the 2018, and so it was applied again in the model based on the acreage of the growth areas. And so this is approximately, looking at your area's average lot sizes to dwelling units. It's approximately 260 dwelling units in this area that's projected, which is approximately 700 people. And then there are industrial loads industrial loads over here in the blue, as well as commercial loads in the pink here. And so I will note for the River Run subdivision, the actual preliminary number of units for each phase were used as opposed to using the standard average lot size. So those were used for that piece. And then the Crestview area. This area, there's sort of two projects going on here. There's the Crestview Drive, which is this pink line along Crestview Drive, and it curves down, and then it meets with this area, which is called Crestview Crossing. Both of these projects are currently under construction or in development to be constructed. Crestview Crossing is a private development. And I will note, just for clarity, these two eastern lots are not part of the Crestview Crossing development. However, they were included in their preliminary sewer report. And so again, using approximate dwelling units, we have about 405 dwelling units, plus the commercial, and there is a little bit of industrial flow that was added with city direction, I believe, for the hospital growth. So Providence Hospital is here, and so that load is added as well. And any questions so far? Okay, and I will note one more thing. So Crestview area, we did use for the crossing, they allocated base loads using the 2018 methodology. And then we did use the 2018 models rainfall derived inflow and infiltration, rather than the report uses 1,000 gallons per acre per day, which is a pretty standard development. And we used the model rainfall INI, which we think is a little bit more conservative, but is still in the ballpark of those values. So it is a note it's different than the report of the developer.
Hey, Emily.
Yeah.
This is Peter. I was just going to add, I think, and I don't know if this is the best spot, Emily, you can correct me, but one of the questions that the city staff had directed us, and part of what we're looking at here is the flow split, and how does that affect the Springbrook trunk line? So the main line that goes down Springbrook, and the split of the flows in the Crestview Drive area, and having us analyze, is it better for the system to have it more go down Springbrook or more go down, Crestview, into Crestview Crossing? That was just something they had put forward for us to look at in particular. And so I'll have those results as we look through these, but I just wanted to preface that discussion that'll come a little later.
Yes. So after those updates, we're looking at planning criteria. Just a quick summary. So the collection system is evaluated at a 5-year, 24-hour storm event, peak flows. And this for Newburgh would be 2.9 inches of rain in 24 hours. And just to put in a little perspective, on Sunday, December 20th, NOAA reported approximately 1.5 inches of rain during the 24-hour period, and Monday the 21st had about an inch. So it would be almost twice as much rain as that Sunday event for the 5-year. And then the evaluation threshold we discussed last time, and we've discussed the 4 options that we sort of considered. And we're moving forward with the 2-foot below rim elevation per the committee's recommendation. I think there might be some discussion in the old business, but for now we're looking at this 2-foot below rim elevation. And then the design criteria, as we've discussed, is what the improvements would be sized to, and we're looking at 85% full depth at peak flows, and there's consideration of major trunk lines, maybe upsized 1 additional pipe size, if that seems to be like a good idea for additional flows with the additional life of pipes.
What are the impacts of the different thresholds? I mean, there's 2 foot below, 1 foot below, 85% depth. What's the impact of that? And then the second question is, what's actually happening?
I'm sorry, can you clarify your second question? What do you mean by that?
We have any data from the real world to show what's actually happening?
So what that means in terms of the different thresholds?
If there's water coming out of the top of a manhole, that is a problem.
Yes.
Does that happen? How close
That
do we get to the top? What threshold is actually happened? The 2 foot, the 1 foot, the 85%? Do we have any real world data, or are we just doing a math exercise?
We do have real world data. That was the 2018 wastewater master plan went through a much more in-depth process and calibrated the model with the flow monitoring data, as well as talking and working with city staffs, operators to I think what you're looking for is ground truthing. Is that really happening? What we're saying is happening. Is it really happening? And so that whole process took place and vetted the model, vetted the process of that analysis. And the scope of what we're doing here was not to re-vet that existing model, and it's calibrated and has been vetted already as a part of that process. We're taking that model that went through that lengthy and detailed process, and we're adding these different new areas. And this is the planning criteria that we're using.
Okay, did the old model, which did it show was actually happening? Was it 85%? Was it 1 foot above the pipe? Was it 2 feet below rim?
The model, it's different in all locations throughout the city, right? Every location is going to have a different hydraulic grade line that it matches that. And I think we could be getting into a much longer discussion about the thresholds, but the threshold for that one, as we had previously discussed in the previous meetings, was 2 foot below the rim. And you're looking for, did it ever overflow? Did it spill out in the model? Did it reflect any of that? And the answer is yes, it did reflect that in the model. And then that was ground truth and discussed with the city staff and operators and vetted that model out at that process.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the planning criteria here before we look at the updated system evaluation? Okay. So looking at the modeled system in the drainage basins, this goes back to a little what Peter was discussing. So the main trunk lines, we've split them up into sort of three. So this is the River Street trunk line in yellow, the blue is the Hess Creek trunk line, and the red shows the Springbrook Road trunk line. Within Springbrook Road, this purple area is shown as the Fernwood Pump Station drainage basin. And as Peter mentioned, so this area up here was previously in the 2018 master plan directed down the Springbrook Road trunk line. And with this update, we've been looking at with the Crestview Drive infrastructure, changing that direction of flow, to go down, and it will go through the Fernwood Pump Station basin.
And the reason for that is to alleviate capacity issues on the Springbrook trunk line.
Will you have to upgrade the pump station?
That's a great question.
Spot on question, Mr. Leonard. But we'll talk more about that.
Well, then it's a question which costs the most. Add some extra pipe between some key joints, or is the pump station?
You're exactly right. Looking at life cycle and what's more important. Most of the time, we would rather avoid pumping. But when you're looking at the size of pipe that we're looking at and impacts with, if it makes the length of pipe that you have to replace more because of that capacity, then that capital cost may be higher than the life cycle, impact more than the O&M of the pump station. So it's a great question. And we don't have all those numbers yet. That's part of our next phase of the evaluation. But that's something we'll be getting to. So it's a great question.
Perfect. Thank you.
Could I just ask a more general question? So are we going to be, this committee at this particular time, going to be mostly concerned with the specifics of the actual pipes and not the pumping stations and not the well, I guess the sewage treatment plant or anything like that. So this, we're really only going to be talking about pipes. Is that correct?
We will also be talking about pump stations. But you are correct, the treatment plant, influent flow is going to the treatment plant, and then the treatment plant capacity was not part of this update.
I see.
Let me add on to that really quick. So we did look at the treatment plant in 2018 pretty heavily. And we also just completed a major $25 million expansion to the treatment plant. So there's no need to upsize that plant at this stage in the game. That'll probably be looked at when and if we add, anything extensive, urban growth boundary or additional growth.
And just on that, again, forgive me for pausing everyone else, but and interrupting. But so when we're talking about the riverfront development and there could be some industrial activity there, is that planning that you just spoke of taking into account and in your planning about what kind of industry might be able to exist there? Is that all part of what you've already done?
Yes, that would be part of what we've already done.
Right. So you're confident that the whatever new growth and whatever new activities might happen will be the sewage treatment plant will actually be able to work reasonably well into the future.
Correct, at least for the next 25 years.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question is, do the plans address what's going to likely happen to the sewer line at the intersection of Fernwood and Brucher?
Fernwood, and say that one more time, please.
Brucher Street comes down, and that intersection between Fernwood and Brucher, right near where your cursor is the sewer line is relatively close to the minimum depth there, and then it drops down into a swale. So when they build the bypass, they're going to end up having to do something with the sewer line, I suppose.
Okay. And that is, are you saying that because it's at its minimum depth, then you might be changing the grade with the bypass?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the question is it going to be ODOT's responsibility to do what has to be done to protect the sewer line, move the sewer line, or is it the City of Newburgh's?
I would let Karen or Brett answer that question.
Yeah, I'll answer that. So it will be ODOT's responsibility to pay for it. We may have to be the ones to actually implement that, but that'll be a part of the IGA when they get the design done. And they will pay for that because it's not in their right of way now. So they have to pay to move that sewer line, whatever we need to move it to or how we need to move it.
I'm glad it's their job, not mine. Thanks, Karen.
Okay, so looking at, sorry?
I just said
Looking
you're
at
welcome.
Sorry, thanks, Karen. Looking at the updated system, we looked at the preliminary evaluation of the system. And so this is our updated evaluation. And this figure in particular shows the 4 different thresholds that we've talked about previously with the different colors of the manholes. And the next figure shows just the red and yellow, which would fall under the 2 foot from rim elevation threshold. And so we've looked at those areas a little more closely. And you'll see, so they are here. This annotated figure is meant to sort of group together some of these surcharged manholes and potential overflow locations as they are typically caused by sort of one bottleneck somewhere on the trunk lines. And so I will note, in terms of being different from the 2018 master plan, there's a similar figure here. And so we have F, L, and M are new areas of interest in comparison to the 2018. I will speak to F a little bit. So this is the riverfront area, and we've looked at the proposed infrastructure from the master plan. And we're not, so right now there's some backwater effects from the River Street trunk line. And so we're just gonna keep an eye on this to see if that is something that, when you alleviate the limitation on the River Street and 11th, if these go away, or if there's any changes that need to happen to that proposed infrastructure.
Have we had any occurrences of sewer manholes overflowing?
In the whole system, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the operators in the 2018 master plan have talked about capacity limitations and issues all along the Hess Creek trunk line. This is over on Villa Street. It also has been known to overflow. There is a really small bottleneck. I think it drops down to a 10 below here and then goes back up in size. So that has been a problem. And then the city also is aware of overflows on the Springbrook Road trunk line.
Thank you.
What happens when they overflow? What kind of remediation takes place?
So I do know they're reported to DEQ, and they work with DEQ on that and looking at the cause of it and why it happened. And then, I don't know, Brett and Karin, do you have anything else to add on that process?
It's a process of the maintenance and operations people work through with DEQ and making process.
So does it go into waterways? That's what I guess what my question would have been.
Does it go into what? I couldn't hear that, sorry.
Has the raw sewage gone into waterways?
I'm not aware of any specifics on any
That's
of
kind of localized then, that's what we're saying.
Yeah, and most of these locations that do end up showing overflows are localized low points within the trunk line. And so you'll see a higher hydraulic grade line along the trunk line, but these are the lower rim elevations of manholes, so they would overflow first if you were raising your hydraulic grade line.
What if you screw down the lids and make it more of a pressure system?
Yeah, so some of these are, I think, bolted, but it's not typically recommended in your system to pressurize those and have that happen. But it is certainly an option, I guess. But typically you're looking to avoid that and avoid risks of overflows.
Connie, in answering your question, does some of this flow into raw sewage directly into the streams? The Hess Creek trunk line follows right along Hess Creek.
Okay.
And I know in talking, I can't remember who exactly I talked with, but at some point in time, isn't there a plan to move that trunk line out of the stream corridor? Because in a lot of places along that stream corridor, the manholes are sticking 6 feet or more out of the ground due to erosion along the
Access for maintenance is very poor, and that's part of the problem of a trunk line along that creek basin there is it's tough to access. It probably doesn't get maintained as much as it should, and which would exacerbate any maintenance problems and root intrusion and things like that. So yeah, the 2018 master plan, the CIP includes getting that out of that creek basin or that creek bottom.
And on that, just if I agree with whoever's operating, show me where that's at with the cursor, thanks.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You were cutting in and out on that.
Yes, something. Is that me or?
If we're not talking, can we put ourselves on mute, please? That way we reduce some of the background noise.
So, just wondered if you could show me where we're talking about this Hess Creek lawn or area where that, okay, thank you.
Sorry, I muted myself. This is the Hess Creek line, trunk line that we're talking about.
And in the 2018 plan, what's the timeline to move it out of that stream corridor?
That is a great question. It's within the 20-year, and I believe it was a priority 2. And so
I'll look that up, Emily, while you guys continue on, and I'll get back to that question. So where was it at as far as the priorities? So.
This is just, I'll add one other item to that. Within that plan, there was there's a series of options, and part of that was in various stages, and there's a looking at possibly lining some of that line as well. So on aspects of it.
Yeah,
it is a phased approach that takes off the peak flows and does help that quite a bit. So then it alleviates some of the worst the higher flows that create the more of the problems.
Any other questions on this figure here right now?
Well, in another, that's probably the oldest trunk line in town, isn't it?
Parts of River might be older, but it is one of the older, yes, trunk lines.
And does anyone know when that was put in?
I would have to reference my GIS data, to be honest. I can get back to you on that if.
Are we talking 40 years or something like that, or 60 years? Just a rough ballpark.
Probably, I believe it was maybe in the 60s or 70s, but I could be mistaken. So.
Okay. And I'm just looking at those manhole covers were, at ground level 60 years ago, and now they're 6 feet out of the ground. Have you considered that there's going to be continual erosion along that stream corridor, and as you get more hardscape north of town, and in the as you get more development in that basin, you're going to have much greater erosion. I know we did some work, where the trestle to kind of spread out the flows a little bit and things like that, but this should maybe be quite a high priority area if it's not at this point in time. If you're looking out another 20 years, I think you're going to maybe have sewer pipe exposed to the surface.
You already have that at George Fox.
Yeah.
Let me jump in here. So it is a pretty high priority. We have been working on doing some flow monitoring. And the plan is to line the sewer pipe north of 99 in the next year. So that'll be the first piece of that. And then we'll do some additional flow monitoring to see how big the pipe needs to be south of 99. That needs to be, part of it is when we get rid of the I&I, how big does the pipe need to be when we pull it up out of the ground? But it's what I'll say is it's probably within the 10-year plan to get that taken care of. But it's not inexpensive either.
I would think it would probably be one of the most expensive. Okay.
Yeah, so some of those and that initial prioritization and how we rank those projects for the recommended CIP will be part of the next presentation, and looking for feedback from you guys as well on that, and whether you think those priorities are aligned properly.
So this areas of interest A to M isn't in order of priority. It's just these are the areas.
Correct. Yeah, I
Okay.
just kind of went clockwise. They're not in any particular order right now.
Okay.
I would like to have, when you look up the trunk line going down Hess Creek, there have been overflows there in the past. How many overflows are we talking about along there in a given year or given 10-year period or whatever?
That is a good question that I do not know offhand. It's something I can consult with the city operators and see what they say about that.
That's one place in the city where you aren't going to get public comment on it because most of it's in, there's no people there on a regular basis. So I would imagine looking at the dots, this is one of our worst areas. And but it's out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. Although there's going to be development down lower on Hess Creek. The public's there's park and rec land along the river where Hess Creek runs right through it and floods that area. And the plan is with the park and rec that we would have a large public area. A lot of people down there in the years to come. And if you have raw sewage and you're in the waters that flow through your property, that's not a very conducive to having people there. Although it'd probably be in the winter, but you're still. Okay, that's the last I'll talk about it for now.
Yeah, no, these are great considerations to have and to think about and to ask about. So I can talk to city operators as well, reach out to them and see if they have more information on the question of how often the overflows are. Sorry.
Emily, I was just going to add, this is Peter again. I was going to add the prioritization from the 2018 wastewater master plan has the upper end of the Hess Creek, as Karen mentioned, lining that and taking care of a lot of the inflow and infiltration coming in there is priority 1A. And then you have 1B is the middle area of that is putting in a new trunk line to intercept a lot of the flows that go to Hess Creek. And then 1C is the Springbrook trunk line upgrades and modifications that were recommended as a part of the master plan. And then there's some additional work that would happen on the line actually going down the lower part of Hess Creek as a part of priority 2 improvements. So, it's a phased approach. And it would be a ginormous and effort to bite off all at one chunk. So, Karen, I don't know if you want anything else to add, but that's what was in the master plan, but then the city, it's a master plan. And so if there's anything the city's adjusted about that since then, I would let you add that at this time.
No, what we can do is bring our 5-year plan that we're working through that we update every year before we do budget. We can bring that to the CAC the next time you talk about wastewater or any of them, and it'll show what the plan is and what the priorities are. But yes, Hess Creek is high on the list to take care of from a sanitary sewer point of view.
Yep.
The reason I bring it up too is that erosion that's been occurring, that corridor is doesn't meander at all. It's turning into more and more of a canyon. I imagine that if we went back and looked at it 40 or 50 years ago, the basin itself, the stream bed itself was a much higher elevation than it is now. I know that Friendsview Manor wants to expand and put a nursing facility on the campus. I told them not to build where they were looking to build along the edge of the canyon, because in another few years they're going to have some problems. I just think it's a real concern area in the city, and George Fox has been dealing with a lot of erosion over the course of time, and there's some real work that needs to be done down there in the long term or in the short term to ameliorate problems that are going to arise in the long term.
Clyde Thomas used to visit his uncle on the lower side of George Fox, and he'd go down in the creek and lay on the bank, and he could reach the water level from the bank. Now the sewer line is 3 or 4 feet above the water line, and it's all exposed. I think one of the problems that's causing this is we have nothing in our stormwater code to maintain historic infiltration into the ground. It seems like all our water just gets flushed out, and we control how quick it's flushed out, but we really aren't maintaining the existing conditions. Therefore, these down cutting of stream channels is just going to get worse and worse unless we change our stormwater policy.
Certainly, with weather events being more dramatic as well, I'm a little concerned. I'm not quite sure if that's being taken care of being considered in some of this planning, but with that level of erosion, certainly my experience has been more in Australia, but you can double the size, the depth of a on one major. So now it's twice as bad. So very aware.
Bonnie, you're cutting out really bad.
I know. I'm not sure what's going on.
Bill, can you mute yourself?
I have muted myself, and
No, that was Bill. I was just saying, there's just a background fuzz going on. So with Bill muted, we can hear you great, Connie. At least I can. Sorry, just being direct.
no worries. So it's not me. I will mute myself though. I guess in case you didn't hear me, it's been my experience in the work we've done that in a major weather event, I've seen creek systems like this double in seismic, in depth, I guess you could say, after one major event. So it's quite possible this could get bad very quickly rather than over a period of 20 years. That's been my experience anyway.
Getting to Leonard's question about changing policies on infiltration off of hard surfaces within the city. Do we have, what are our policies in the city of Newburgh for new construction? Or I know, like I just talked to Tony Roos about the Elliott development, and they're going to put in some stormwater capture systems along Elliott Road, and some treatment of stormwater runoff. How much of we have all these basins, smaller catch basins within the city, that then a lot of it gets dumped right into Hess Creek. Where are we?
Yeah, so, Peter, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. It's going to, as we get larger, if we don't change that system that we've had, and we don't address the infrastructure that we have right now and make some changes, I can see it being a horrific problem in the future.
Right. So what we have in the current design and construction standards is a hierarchy that encourages the infiltration, the LIDA approaches that on the infiltration, the rain gardens, those elements there. There's, that's not always appropriate in all cases, but there's a hierarchy that all new construction needs to go through, and the treatment is required for new impervious area of over 500 square feet is imposed. So that's, I think we have in the old business section, a little more discussion on that available. So,
okay, is it encouraged, or is it actually a policy or a regulation?
Currently, it's encouraged in the sense that there's a hierarchy to go through, and it has to be demonstrated why those type of facilities would not be utilized before something else is done. And most of it is done with even the basins that get created that are more regional are still infiltrating where they can, based upon the soils at the locations.
Okay.
Actually, I'm writing letter number 3 that I'm going to send out before the next storm meeting of all the recommendations. One of them is we've got to figure out how to keep infiltrating on site at historic levels. Having designed several projects with zero stormwater runoff, it seems like it's really cheaper and easier to do. Also, we're going to need to change our development codes. Our cul-de-sacs are too big. We got 4 different standards in Newburgh, and we seem to pick the biggest one. And so there's a lot of things we can do, but this needs to be not only stormwater management, but zoning changes to our standards. We just don't realize that we're just controlling the rate of runoff to historic levels. We aren't retaining the historic runoff to historic levels. So
I think this is a, can we table this conversation? Because we're gonna come right back to this in the old business section. And so for now, can we keep going with the wastewater?
I just was telling you, I'm writing the letter, so it'll be
Perfect.
out before the next meeting, but it's going to address.
Yeah, just before we get too in depth down this road, since we'll be coming right back to it in old business.
Great. So I just have one more slide, and it's going over next steps in the process. And so, oops, excuse me, jump too far. The next step would be evaluating the improvement alternatives. So looking at those areas of interest and evaluating what improvements are required to meet your evaluation threshold, and then using design criteria to size those improvements. Once we have those projects and alternatives, looking at prioritizing the recommended alternatives, and those get put into a draft capital improvement plan that'll be updated. And so all of those pieces will be drafted and prepared for the next meeting, which is beginning of February. And then we'll be looking for questions, comments, and your review on those pieces for the next meeting. So that's all of my information for the night. Are there any other questions or comments on the wastewater update?
And I'll just add that if there's any comments that you have on this, you can email those to me on the materials that were provided for this meeting for the wastewater component that have been developed to this stage. So email me the comments and we'll get those to the consultant to consider.
So just to clarify, the next meeting, you'll have the list of priorities.
Correct.
For projects and expected cost as well, projected
yes
cost.
Yeah, the cost will be part of the capital improvement plan, okay. Having this construction cost there.
Okay, perfect. And you'll also bring the, what was it that Leonard and Pete asked for, the historic, oh my gosh, the times that we have had sewage runoff, or correct?
Overflow.
Yes, Hess Creek, but will you also have that data for the other priority areas, or is that already involved in the criteria for selection?
We discussed it previously in the 2018 process, but I can certainly ask the operators just in general where they've seen area problems and how often, those kinds of things for the whole system.
And another thing that it would be nice to know is, you know, Hess Creek is the oldest trunk line. When you have big runoff events, we have a lot of sub basins now that empty into it. How much infiltration do they estimate comes in to that trunk line during those high water events? I would imagine it would be incredibly high.
Unfortunately, we are not able to determine that because it all comes into one pump station, all of our trunk lines. So we don't have, at this point, we don't have a way to separate out where the INI is coming from specifically in the trunk line. It's one of the reasons we're doing some additional flow monitoring on Hess Creek line, is to find out how much is in there further up stream and then as we move down.
You do know though how many CFS you're getting at different events at the pump station though, right?
At the influent pump station, yes, we do.
And so, and those are directly tied to your highest events are probably tied to high runoff events.
Yes, when we have more rain, we have more wastewater that hits the influent pump station, but that comes from all of the basins within the city, not
Correct.
just Hess Creek.
So, well, could we have that data, please, on high, you know, on a regular flow and then during high water or high runoff events? Just
Yeah, actually,
to have an idea of whether or not it's be worth putting quite a bit of money into just controlling stormwater runoff so that they don't hit those trunk lines. Does that make sense?
Pardon?
Does that make sense?
So,
Well,
Yeah.
if we see, you know, really increased flows during high rainfall events, you know, we know we have a whole bunch of infiltration. Doesn't really matter which trunk line that we have it coming off of. If our policies or regulations within the city or those catch basins, the sub basins that we have that run off into streams or whatever, if we could do a much better job at getting infiltration and keeping those peak flows out of the streams or out of the trunk lines, maybe we don't have to do so much with pump stations or things like that. Maybe it's better, that's what I'm getting at. Maybe it's better that we put our energy into, instead of increasing capacity of the pipe and the pump stations, maybe if we just increase the infiltration of water within the city, we will come up with a solution that's probably a lot cheaper, or at least in the long term is going to make a huge difference.
yeah, so let me address that a little bit. So a couple of things is we actually have a lot of infiltration into our sewer pipes now. So actually to infiltrate more groundwater into the ground right now, it will get into the sewer pipe, which causes more of an issue for us. We have actually embarked on some projects over the last 5 years where we're trying to fix our sewer pipe so we don't have that flow and infiltration from the stormwater, groundwater, that kind of thing into the pipes. And we've actually done a pretty good job of starting to limit how much stormwater we have in our sewer pipe. We have to deal with the sewer pipe also. But yes, I agree. If we can eliminate some of that infiltration or the stream or the stormwater into our sewer pipe, we don't have to make our sewer pipes quite as big. Again, that's why we're trying to do some of the flow monitoring information and line the upper portion of the Hess Creek sewer pipe to see, okay, if we line it and we make it so that we are not getting additional infiltration into that pipe, can the pipe further downstream not have to be as big as the plan calls for it to be?
And
so yes, we are trying to do those things before we just arbitrarily put in bigger pump stations and 45-inch pipes and those kinds of things. Not that they make 45-inch pipes, but those types of things. So yes, we are trying to look at all of those pieces as we move forward.
do we monitor, you know, from the sub basins or from, do we have any idea how big the flows are into low-lying areas during rain events? You know,
What I can tell you in the past is that the amount of water that we've had hit our wastewater treatment plant in rain events is about 7 times normal in the past. We have done a lot of work again in the last 5 years, and we aren't hitting quite those high numbers. So it's doing what we want it to do. So we normally in the wintertime or before wintertime average flow, we would hit about 4 at our 4 MGD in our treatment plant. And in the past, we have hit up to 21.
Okay. So Okay. The, what I'm trying to, and I'm sure we're going to revisit this, but you know, if we require people to start, or we offer programs to start building rain gardens in people's yards, or to start capturing that water further away from our sewage lines, what do we do with all the street runoff, parking lot runoff? I know we've done a lot of things in the city to are those cost effective? Are they more cost effective than putting a lot of money into upsizing pipes? Because if you get 7 times the flow during a rain event, obviously you don't, for the sewage itself, you don't need the size of pipe that we're talking about. But if we can get that water from not reaching those pipes and infiltrating, maybe it's a much broader problem, but maybe it's much cheaper to do. That's the question I want. That's the question I want answered. And I don't know if there's some data from some other cities, or I know Salem does a lot of this stuff, and they're quite good at it. I haven't been up to Portland, but they have these issues. How are they going about it? Salem's a really good example. They're a little bit bigger than us. They have a lot of flooding problems during big rain events, and they've had to take some pretty drastic steps. But a lot of them have been just trying to get that stormwater where it doesn't, even reach those low-lying areas where they're going to infiltrate their sewage system. Anyway, I think it's something that we should know or have a good idea about.
And I will just jump in here and say there was a more in-depth evaluation of the I&I and kind of looking at that in different basins and pump stations in the 2018 Wastewater Master Plan. And some of those higher priority pipes based on a variety of.
Interrupt for just a sec. When you start using acronyms, I don't know what's I&I?
Sorry, I&I is inflow and infiltration, and so it's stormwater that is that enters the sewer system. And so typically inflow is where you have cross connections, or you have if a catch basin were mistakenly directly piped to the sewer, that would be inflow. And then infiltration is groundwater that gets in through cracks or joints that aren't sealed, different places like that. And so, yeah, so the I&I is what you're asking about. I think the influence of the rainwater on the sewer flows.
Does anyone have any idea if there's a way to, lining the pipes is obvious, but do we really need larger pipes, or do we just need to be able to handle our stormwater better? And obviously, if we have 8 or 7 times the flow during a high rain event, then it's really about stormwater. It's not about sewage.
Well, usually they just TV the line and then they go through and figure out which joints are leaking. Then they go back and they run equipment through and they reseal the joints. So that's how it's typically handled.
A lot of the projects with the I&I are lining the pipes and replacing ones that have bad joints, and some of those are replacement projects. And as Carmen mentioned, we've been actively over the last 5 years working through that I&I project. We're seeing improvements, and so that's kind of the first step in this, is getting the water that's infiltrating and getting into the ground that is getting into the pipes, is keeping them from getting into our pipes. So I appreciate the input on the stormwater piece, and there's definitely things we need to continue to look at, is where are the ways to improve things to, first of all, keep the water out of the pipes, do what we can there. And then that helps to identify where we truly have what pipe sizes we need to deal with sewage flows rather than the water that's getting into those pipes. So
How much does pipelining decrease the capacity? You may get a better flow coefficient, but you also have a lesser diameter. So what's the difference?
I don't have a direct answer for that at this time for that piece of it. You can look into that.
Great. Are there any further questions or comments for Emily? Connie?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Emily can answer it. That's all. I wasn't sure if this is the time to ask that. But as we've just had our, I'm on Franklin Street and it's just been dug up and we have new sewer lines and everyone's been very nice, by the way, and the contractors have been very efficient. So we're very happy with it. But I was just curious as to, with your prioritization, we're obviously this area, I guess we're west of George Fox here is being replaced, and that's been in probably about maybe 7 or 8 blocks that I'm aware of, nearby. So how much of the city has already been, the pipes have already been replaced? And, are we, is Franklin Street, halfway through the plan or a quarter of the way through the plan? Or so obviously you have some sort of plan about what already that how you're going to roll out your replacing the pipes and things. So where are you at with that, I guess is the question, but I don't know if that's Emily's purview or not. So.
Yeah, that's more on our side as we're rolling those projects out. As Emily indicated, there is an I&I study that was done. And that was supplemented into the 2018 plan. So that gives us the master plan of I&I projects. And then we're going out and combining with the pavement preservation projects where we're doing road constructions is going in and reevaluating based on those priorities of how combining to balance what is the priorities on the I&I projects and the street projects so that they all dovetail together. And I don't think we have any record or we haven't established exactly where we're at in that process between the overall plan and what we've done to date. That's a good question. So it's something we'll be looking to see how we can get that established.
Well, I asked because it, clearly, and what you're asking us to do as are making some kind of recommendations about prioritization, it'd be just interesting to see where we're at and how much further we need to go rather than just on the manhole themselves.
Yeah.
With the red dots is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right. Understood.
All right, shall we move on to the next piece? Any last questions? No. Okay. So let's move on to old business. And we got a couple pieces from Leonard. Let me see here. I'm going to pull it up really quick. So Leonard, we're gonna, I guess, so in our last meeting, we kind of spoke on the desire to have a broader policy kind of conversation in terms of stormwater and drainage. And so this is a good time for Leonard to speak to what his policy recommendations are, broader policy recommendations are. I think that it's a good time to say that we don't have to come to resolution now, but we can still make final recommendations for the stormwater master plan at the next meeting, since that's what we'll be discussing for the next meeting. So with that said, Leonard, would you like to speak to your letter to the committee?
Well, I'm writing another letter that specifically addresses the stormwater. And let's see.
Can we, since we have the December 17th letter in front of us, can we go from that one?
It's on my desk, it's just camouflaged. There was a December 7 letter, but there I was really talking, we covered the water system on that. Then we had one on the sewer system, and we came up with the manhole within 2 feet of the top. But
Do you want to address that first? Because I figured we would start with the piece that's on the agenda that's speaking to your December 17th letter, but we can go ahead with the next letter that you sent out if you'd like to start with that too, in regards to the motion that you made at the last meeting. Do you want to start with that piece, Leonard? Because
yeah, the motion was concerned about the 2-foot rule. I mean,
right. There was some definite technical difficulties in the last meeting regarding Zoom. Folks were not able to unmute themselves.
right.
And because of that, I understand that you got word from Mike that he tried to second it, but was unable. So we need to, though, have the motion needs to be verbally read for the record and also the second. So if you would like to make a motion, we can.
Well, I made the
revisit that.
motion and Mike Gubler tried to second it. So the copy of the letter I have is dated the 7th of December. And basically,
Yes, I saw that, but we need to, as I understand it, we need the motion and the second to be verbally read so that we have it for the record.
okay, the motion is, I hereby move that the recommendation made at the last meeting to adopt the 2-foot roof in the manhole rim for sewer manholes be withdrawn, and that before we adopt any policies that we receive, 1, completed copies of the consultant studies in a reasonable period of time to review. 2, a full description, prioritized list and cost of needed improvements. 3, 4 options with projected costs on system development maintenance cost. A, do nothing, the impacts. B, minimal improvements. C, medium improvements. D, full improvements. And 4, recommendations from A, the city engineer, B, the city public works director, C, the community development director, and D, the design consultants.
And I seconded it.
All right, so let's say all in favor of withdrawing the previous, withdrawing the 2-foot rule and opening the discussion again. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Nay. I'm getting some feedback. Are folks getting feedback? Karen, are you able to tell?
I'm getting,
Yeah, I'm seeing some from Bill. It might be helpful if for the vote, if you guys raised your hand and then that way we could count who is voting where, rather than the ayes or nays, since we did have some on both sides of it.
Sorry, I muted myself. Okay, so all those in favor, please raise your hand. My screen is frozen. Is your screen frozen as well?
No.
There were five people who voted yes.
I counted 6.
Thank you. Those opposed? Those opposed, raise your hand, please.
That's a 2.
2. Okay. That looks like the ayes have it. We will be opening up withdrawing the decision, the 2-foot threshold decision, and opening up the conversation again.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. Can we, if we're not speaking, can we mute, please? Perfect. Thank you. All right, so it has been open for discussion. Are there thoughts?
I'll start it off. Seems like a long time ago. Hey, if I'm reading the room right, and I think I am, it certainly felt to me that we were expected to make some technical decisions, and I'm thinking this is part of what Leonard's concerns are, based on 85% and 2-foot and et cetera, without a lot of information about what the implications were for each one of those choices. So in the end, I believe in that meeting, we went with the status quo. Am I correct there? Okay, and so, but I got the feeling, and I went along with that, because I didn't really feel like I had very much information to not say that, but I got the impression that the consultants were recommending something else, but they didn't really say they were recommending something else specifically. And so it seems, and in addition to that, the implications, the economic implications and the economic impact on the citizens of Newburgh is not clear. It's still not clear. Am I correct there too? About what each one of those decisions that we might make, what would happen? How much money is that going to cost, my neighbors and myself if this group make that decision? And so I believe what we're looking for is more information so we can make better decisions for everyone else, and not maybe making decisions just based on, well, let's go with the status quo because we don't know anything else. So that's my understanding of the situation, and my agreement to vote that we discuss this some more is it would be, I don't like to make decisions unless I'm, especially on behalf of other people, unless I'm relatively sure what those implications are going to be. So, so that's just where I stand with it.
My opinion is we've got several city engineers that work for the city. They're on staff. They're more involved in this than we are, and they should be able to make some recommendations of which way the citizens should actually go on their funding. So hiring a consultant, they really put a job in perspective, but nothing beats ground truthing and experience and knowledge of the system. And we have incredible talent down at City Hall, and let's get some recommendations from them.
Brett, could I ask you, were recommendations made, as Leonard suggests, from the engineers and city staff in the consultation of the decision, the 2-foot decision?
That was all done with the 2018 master plan. So those were the recommendations that came through that process with the city staff, with the consultant, and then through with the CAC at that time. And then towards the end of the project, this issue came up again to be relooked at in greater detail, and that's what carried through over with the master plan. It stayed at that 2-foot below rim through that piece of it, but it was being asked to have that relooked at. So that's what the ask was, coming back to this for this CAC, and we recognize that you were not giving adequate information. It looks like based on that for element to go along with that piece of it. What we intended to do was give you the presentation, identify where things were, and have it play out. That hindsight showed that was less than information probably than what was needed for that. So we tried to get some other information. There's a process with this where the CAC is giving some recommendations and some input. The initial piece with that meeting was to present trying to give an unbiased input from yourselves. So that's the background of what I have for that.
So in the decision to make the 2-foot threshold, you said that this was made in conjunction with the studies and with city staff, engineering, and the previous advisory committee?
Correct. I was not part of that at that time. That's what had occurred and what is documented and moved forward with. So those recommendations get put into those reports and the information as we're going through this process, and we're giving you as we are developing these on all these master plan updates, the technical updates and the full update, as we're developing information, we're sharing it with you, and we're looking for that input. Kind of part of that ground truthing is part of it. It's like with the engineering staff has some items, we get that information from maintenance, operations where appropriate, and bring that in. And the next piece is information from the community. When you're representing the community, to say, when we give you information, to look at it and go, yeah, that makes sense, or no, it doesn't. And then we can have that discussion, take that input and take that back with the consultants and incorporate that into the document that ultimately will come back to you to kind of go, yeah, this is good, or you have some recommendations to add to the item, and then it'll go from there to planning commission and then ultimately to city council. And then from the master plan is when the capital improvement program gets developed that Karin had talked about, that then we get into the actual projects and laying that out.
I've been thinking here, it's really tough to make decisions when I don't feel like I have the information I need. And one of the things, we have 3 basins, and I don't know who was talking to me when they said that they all end up at the pump station right below the sewage treatment plant, I take it. But there is a pump station on Chehalem, and that on Chehalem Creek by where what's the name of this, where the bridge is there. We should have data on that, on the volume pumped by that. And then is Springbrook pumped from is it all gravity flow all the way to the sewage treatment plant, or is there a pump station along that trunk line?
On the Springbrook, for that piece of the Fernwood pump station pumps into the Springbrook trunk line.
Okay.
So this flows from the east of there.
And so the Springbrook trunk line does gravity feed the sewage treatment plant?
Yes.
But Hess Creek Basin does not gravity feed. And what's the basin to the east?
The Chehalem Basin.
The west, excuse me.
The Chehalem Basin.
Yeah, and that has a pump station on it. So we should actually, if we have the 2 pump stations and then the volume of water, we should know that it's entering the wastewater treatment plant. We should actually know then what amount of water is coming from each basin.
Let me clarify that, Peter, is that although there's pump stations on each one of those basins, when you get down close to the treatment plant, they are all gravity flow. So there are pipes from, Emily, can you pull up the map of the system?
Well, I've been looking at it, but I can't.
Well, let me see if I can help a little bit.
Okay.
So, is this the one you're looking for, Karin? This is the pump station basins.
Yeah, that's fine. So what happens is, although there's a pump station, it drops into the Springbrook trunk line, and then it gravity feeds down to the treatment plant. Okay.
Right.
Hess Creek gravity feeds down in the treatment plant. And all of these pump stations here then drop into the gravity lines that then gravity into the treatment plant. So we don't have, so there's a bunch of gravity lines and system that goes into each one of these that's not directly related to the pump station. Does that?
Well, but
There's no way right now to separate out how much is in Hess Creek, how much is specifically coming down the Hess Creek trunk line versus the others.
there's no way we can pull that
No, we don't have that data.
data.
Nope. We do not.
Okay, that would be awfully good data to have. There should be some way to monitor that.
Unfortunately, we just don't have that data.
Well, that would be one of my recommendations, to be able to gather that data on a continual basis. And that would give you, at least if we ever end up having problems, that we can narrow it down to a single basin anyway.
Don't you have pumps and timers on the pumps? Can't you determine how long they're running? How many gallons a minute they put out when they run?
We can't. Yeah, yes, but what I'm saying is each one of these basins drop down into the influent pump station, and then they're pumped up to the wastewater treatment plant. So I don't have, what Peter's asking for is a way to separate out specifically the flow out of the Hess Creek trunk versus the others. And I don't have a way to do that.
Well, is Hess Creek?
I can tell you what's coming into the treatment plant from all of it, and the difference between when it's raining versus when it's not raining. But I don't have a way to tell you specifically what's coming from Hess Creek versus the others.
Don't you have a pump station down on Dayton Avenue? So you could get data from that.
We do, but again, Leonard, from Dayton Avenue, we still flow through all of these other pipes, and we gather we gather sewage from Denise's house between Dayton Avenue pump station and the treatment plant. All of this area in Old Town, gravity flows, and so Dayton Avenue is pumped into those gravity lines, and then it flows into the sewage treatment plant.
Right. So you have sections of town. You have Fernwood Pump Station. You know what the volumes are on that. You have the Dayton Avenue one. You know what the volumes are there. So then you take the one down by the sewer plant, and then you can say subtract those two, and you get what the rest of the town is. So
that's the rest of the town, but that's not Hess Creek trunk line specifically, which is what Peter was asking for.
Well, but that just having a good idea of what's coming from where would be really good. And if there's any way that you could pull that kind of data and we could extrapolate maybe from that some ideas of what some of the issues are. I mean, you're talking about this. Well, I guess you can't see my cursor, but the basin to the east. What's that called again? Not just the Fernwood Basin, but the Springbrook, and then to the west. What's the furthest west called again?
Sorry, which color are we asking?
The basin furthest west.
Oh, I was calling it the River Street.
Okay.
Trunk line.
Okay, so yeah, it's hard to tell how. I can see how you aren't going to be very accurate, but it could give us a pretty good idea of what each basin is contributing, especially during rain events. If we don't have the ability to do that, I would suggest that we get the ability to do that. That would help us determine a lot about where we are I&I.
you can also do flow measurements in the summertime, and then come up with a daily volume, and then in the winter, you're gonna have the pump station records, and then you can figure out what the I&I is.
Can I ask a question, Brett, maybe Karen, maybe Doug, you guys can answer this in regards to Leonard's, maybe Leonard, you can also clarify, you want costs for doing nothing, minimal, so I'm wondering, do you want that for each, are you asking for that for each threshold level?
I asked for 4 options: do nothing, minimal improvements, medium, and full.
Right. How does that relate to the question of the threshold level? Because part of the decision that we need to make is setting the threshold level so that we can move forward with deciding what the projects are. And so I guess I'm trying to, I'm clarifying what it is that you're asking for specifically in terms of those 4 things. Are you asking for those 4 things for each threshold level?
I'm asking for recommendations and options. We know how much the capacities are. We kind of have some idea what the flows are. What we want to do is figure out what the problem is. And there's obviously several different levels of solutions to problems. You can start by doing nothing. You can do minimal improvements. You can do medium. You do full. Well, each time you do that, there's a cost. The cost is in systems development charges. It's in hookup charges. It's going to affect the cost of housing. It affects whether or not people with don't have the huge incomes, whether they'll be able to live in Newburgh. And the city council is going to have to make decisions and decide how much money we want to spend, how much we want to raise our fees, how much we're going to impact the cost it takes to live in town. We've got what, 3 or 4 engineers in the city, and you guys spend your whole days working with these systems. What are your recommendations? And each recommendation, how's it going to affect our city fees? How's it going to affect livability? What's the damage to the environment it's going to protect? I just, maybe I'm dense, but I don't understand that we've gotten any answers to those questions.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
Yeah, can I ask you, it sounds as though, from what I've heard from Brett, that those recommendations were made in the 2018 wastewater master plan update. And so, and the decision was to move forward with the 2-foot threshold.
Well, if the decisions are made.
Are you asking for?
If it was done in 2018, why are we looking at it again?
Okay, so this is Doug. So when we put together the 2018 plan, there was a conversation about, 85% of pipe, full of pipe, 2 feet below rim. The conclusion of the recommendation from that committee that went forward to the Planning Commission and to the City Council that was included in the 2018 plan was 2 feet below rim. But we looked at it as there was this question that was answered. There was a question that was asked. The committee made a recommendation. So when we came back to focus on looking at implementing the riverfront plan and looking at the water, the wastewater, the storm, and the transportation, the focus of each of those was to look at the riverfront area. In the context of the wastewater, to be transparent, because there was a minority view at the time in 2018 about this issue about 2 feet below rim, we chose to pose that question to you to see and get your feedback. So you have an option to say, okay, the committee the Planning Commission and the council in 2018 agreed with the 2 foot below rim. There is, again, this minority view out there. It was like, well, should it be full pipe? Should it be 85%? You know, Karin and Brett can get to the details about how we design stuff into the future. So that's why we asked the question. So, but again, the focus of this issue about the wastewater system and the water system is specifically about the riverfront plan area. The storm portion that you're looking at is citywide. A subset of that is the riverfront area. So we wanted to pose the question again about what should it be? So your questions about the details are great, but Leonard, I would ask a question because I've had to deal with this in other situations in the last 6 years. When we use terms such as minimal improvements, how do you define minimal? When we talk about medium improvements, how do you define medium? We got into this in a land use issue about what's large and what's not large. And I can see this by the verbiage. I can see Denise's reaction is it's going down that same path. It took, you know, months and months and months and months to try to define what means large. And so right now, I don't know what minimal means, and I don't know what medium means. I can get a pretty good guess of what full improvements mean. That means bigger pipes. If you're trying to get to 85% of the flow in the pipe, which then has a cost implication that you were alluding to, which could then have an implication on rates, which then has an implication on affordability of housing within the community as a whole.
I got a professional license, and we have people working at the city with professional licenses. I want to see their opinion in writing.
Part of this process.
Wrong question. I think we're asking the wrong question in that, you know, there's 5 things that affects the sewage system. From everything that we've discussed here, it's, you know, you can reduce flows of I&I, the number of sewage inputs from residences to businesses. You know, then you look at the size of the pipes, the pump size, and then the sewage treatment size. And what, you know, it's not about, to me, it's what's the biggest bang for our buck? It's not so important. I mean, it looks to me like we already have size of pipe that's big enough. I&I is our biggest issue. If you go, you know, if you have a 7-fold increase in into your sewage treatment plant during a rain event, then that's our problem. You know, you aren't going to have overflows in the summer. You aren't going to have, you know, so it would be better to frame this, I believe, not about minimal improvements or those kind of things, because I agree with Doug is that we can spend years, you know, deciding what's minimal, what's, you know, large. And, but we have 5 things that we need to decide. Do we need to put money into I&I, reducing that, where, you know, does the city need to limit the size based on that we can't handle any more sewage? That doesn't look like it's the case. Do we need to increase our pipes and our pumps? And we, you know, we've already been assured that we do not, although did we just put a bunch of money into our sewage treatment plant, making it much bigger? Is that correct? I heard earlier.
Yeah,
Well,
we
ahead,
spent $25 million expanding our sewage treatment plant, correct. And that was based on the 2007 master plan that was completed when the growth rate in the city was projected to be a lot higher than what it is today. So, so yes, that was done at that point in time.
Are these 5 things that I'm describing, are these the 5 things that we're really dealing with? Now, I can reiterate them. You know, I&I, pipe size, pump size, sewage treatment plant size, and the number of customers that are using the sewage system.
Well, I agree with you, Peter, totally.
And
What
well,
I'm saying,
but-
we got 3 engineers at least on staff at the city. They spend all this time working with consultants. They work for the city. They're aware of the problems. Let's have them give us a recommendation instead of expecting us in 4 hours to come up with these things that may cost hundreds or thousands or millions of dollars. It may have an impact on other things that are important to us in life. But
we have to have citizens input on anything that we're going to do.
right. But
you
the
know,
professionals like doing a study, they're studying the problem and they can come up with
Right.
recommendations and they can come up with costs. And I would like to see those. And I feel like I'm being put in the spot in 4 hours of looking at this now to have to come up with a decision that somebody who's gotten paid several $1,000s to study it is not giving us.
Well, that's,
I don't disagree with
It's
you.
my understanding that those recommendations were made in the 2018 master plan update though, correct? That the staff recommendations were taken account for?
That is correct.
Okay, so.
So that's what I remember.
All done if it's settled issue.
What?
So what are we supposed to do if it's already a settled issue? I haven't seen the recommendations. I mean,
Well, I
you're
believe
asking
that
me with 4 hours of looking at this to come up with a decision that somebody who spent the last 3 years and hired consultants and read the reports and has talked to staff and everything. I'm supposed to be smarter than the people that work on it every day. I want to see the recommendations from the city staff and what the impacts of them are before I make a decision. That's not an unreasonable expectation.
So Brett, so given, I'll go back to my issue about lack of clarity about what minimal and medium means. Please define it for me. But if we went through the process to evaluate the 4 things that Leonard has raised, is that within this project scope and budget?
No, not within the scope or budget to be able to do that for all scenarios. If we come up with identify what is minimal and medium improvements, what those are, if we had all of that and went through that process, no, especially if we're trying to get all the way down to what are future rates going to be or what are STCs going to be related to the projects that might come out of this. What we're doing is a master plan update. We're going through the process. The CAC, the questions and information we're providing are elements that a lot of the information, Leonard, that you're asking for. Emily's talked about that before. The next round with the wastewater, we're going to be seeing those projects and going to show what the prioritization is based on the recommendations of everything that staff and the consultant have worked through. Then we're going to be looking at it, having the CAC to take a look at that. Does that is what we present and that was recommendations make sense to you? Yes, no, maybe. And then you provide back the comments to that and then we incorporate that. So.
Well, that was my item number 4, what you just said, recommendations from the city, public works, community development, and the design consultants. So I hope to get those soon.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things to remember, Leonard, is that when we work with our consultant teams on doing these functional plans, is that yes, there is a vetting process and communication that occurs between staff and the consultant team, but we never bring anything forward in front of a committee that we know has a critical flaw and that would fail. I mean, we vet that out first. And so what we're down to is this issue. So I'm going to break this apart. It's a 2-piece. The primary focus is about the riverfront master plan area and what do we need for a wastewater system and a water system and a storm system for that area. We've already taken care of the land use piece. The transportation is in process and it will go through its final review processes in January and February. So that is the primary focus. This ancillary secondary focus is this kind of lingering issue about flows in the pipe and what they need to be. It could be that this group as a recommendation is that, yes, it is still an issue of concern. It is outside of the scope of this particular project, given the focus, but it's something that the committee could make a recommendation to Planning Commission and Council to say, we want staff to come back in a couple of years. We got to put money into a budget to be able to do it, to come back and further evaluate this issue about what is the policy, what is the standard that we want for the flow in that pipe? 85% full of pipe or 2 feet below rim?
I'm asking for recommendations from the city.
Well, I think you just got mine.
No, I didn't.
I just gave you a verbal suggestion of how to address the issue.
Well, I
If
know
you don't
that's how you address it.
agree with it, that's fine. You can choose
what
not to agree with it, but I
that's
just
what I
gave
see.
you, from the community development director's perspective, here's a way to address it.
I want recommendations from the people that work with us every day, that have professional licenses or jobs with the city, that work with it every day. It's not that difficult. You guys know what the problems are.
But Leonard,
And it's-
I don't want to get into necessarily the debate because I can watch the faces of the other members here.
Yeah.
But we've just said, we do not have the scope in the budget to do what you've asked to be done.
And so you expect me to do it.
No, that's not what I just made a recommendation for, is that this group could say, yes, this is an issue of concern. It's not within the scope and not within the budget for this particular project, which is focused on the riverfront area. But your recommendation is within, again, 2 years, is to come back and we need to convene another committee and we need to address this issue and then dive into the details with the dollars that we can identify to go through the level of detail of analysis that you're asking for.
Leonard, this is Karen. Let me jump in here for a minute. So in the 2018 master plan, as Doug noted, is we went through this process. And at the time, the CAC and the technical committee, which included the city engineer, public works, all of those folks, and the consultants, recommended that the projects be chosen or be prioritized and put into the CIP based on the hydraulic grade line being 2 foot below the rim. That was the recommendation from everybody that sat around that table at the committee, and that included the city engineer and the public works folks. So as Doug said, and that was the recommendation, we took that to the city council, and there was a minority person from that committee that came and said, well, I'm not sure that that's the right thing after all. I would like to see us look at a different hydraulic grade line, a different threshold in order to put a project on a list. And so the council said at that stage in the game, we're going to adopt the 2018 master plan as it sat, which was with the hydraulic grade line of 2 foot below, which is how the projects were added. But we would come back and look at this question again. My recommendation would remain the same, is to pick the projects based on 2 foot below the hydraulic grade line being 2 foot below manhole rim. So that was the recommendation 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, I guess. And that would be my recommendation as we sit today, to continue to pick the projects based on that. Now, that's not how we design the system. So when we get to a point where we're actually designing pipe, we then look at and we design a pipe based on no more than 85% full. So that's how we pick the ultimate pipe size when we get down to the point of we're actually going to build a project. So that was our recommendation 2 years ago, and I'm not sure why I haven't received any information that would lead me to believe that that's a problem. We don't have most of the questions had to do with whether or not we were having sewage back up into people's homes. And at the time I spoke with Russ Thomas, who's been at the city for a long time, longer than dirt, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, and he said he could count 3 times that sewage had ever backed up into somebody's basement. And that normally had to do with a downstream blockage in those 3 times that it occurred. So to me, that leads me to believe that a 2 foot below hydraulic grade line is not an issue within the city. So.
If I could just jump in there, that's what I needed to hear. So I'm happy with the 2 foot.
Okay, I'm glad to help.
I'm not adverse to that, but that's what's my motion is I want recommendations from the city engineer, the public works director, and the community development director. So when I receive that, I would then entertain a motion.
As I understand it, just to clarify what I understood your motion was, Leonard, was it was a motion to withdraw the decision and open it up for conversation. And then what you wanted following was an addition to the conversation. I didn't understand that to be that you wanted each of those pieces, and that was the motion. I understood the motion to be withdrawing the decision and opening it up for conversation.
No, I said, and that before we adopt any policies that we receive, and then I listed the 4 items.
Does it say the whole reason we're discussing this now is because the city council determined, or someone determined, that the minority view had some legitimate concerns? And if so, what were those concerns that would prompt us to even be talking about this now?
We're just here to talk about the riverfront, adding the riverfront in. I mean, that's why it got reopened, right? I mean, isn't that what you just said, Doug?
If we had not been working on the riverfront, there would be no CAC meeting to even have this discussion of this minority point of view.
When I went to Oregon State, they always taught that
Bill,
problems given.
Mr. Rourke, I think it's your computer that's causing the feedback. Thank you.
And so I thought it was nuts for a few years after college, but now after 50 years in the engineering field, you know, it makes a lot of sense. Given we have a sewer system, we've studied it, required, well, what's the problem? What do we need to do? Once you figure out what it's to do, then you got several options. There's a do nothing, what happens then, you can throw some money at it, what happens then, or you can fix it 100%. So there's options. It's a political problem to decide, do you want to do the minimum or the gold-plated thing? But to make a decision politically, you need to know what the relative costs are. But we hire consultants to come up with answers. We have city staff that review this stuff every day. Why is the city staff and the consultant?
Leonard, I'm going to interrupt you. I love you to death. This is not the scope of work for this project.
Well,
this is not what these.
What is the scope? What is the scope?
I would
Scope
also
of work for this project was to look at and address the issues about the wastewater, stormwater, and water system within the riverfront master plan area, which encompasses approximately 460 acres of land.
I must have
given
missed
Go ahead, Madam Chair. Sorry.
given that this is outside of the scope of the group and of this committee, I can and that we've withdrawn the 2 foot pipe decision. Can someone who please inform me, are folk comfortable with making a decision? Do we have to, we need to move forward with the with a threshold decision, correct?
We passed my motion, so let's do what the motion said.
The motion hasn't passed. So there was a motion and there was a second. And then there's now been the discussion and deliberation. At some point in time, somebody could call for the question where you would actually vote. And I would recommend, Brett, that you do a roll call vote.
So the we can vote on this, but we can also make the recommendation that we want this reopened at in a different period of time with different consultants and a different scope of work later, right?
That is correct.
I read it and we voted on it, right?
Nope, you have not voted on, you, Leonard, made a motion. Mike made a second. We
Right.
had deliberations, but there has been no vote on that
And
motion.
There actually was a vote.
There was a vote to reopen it and have a discussion.
Discussion.
Yes.
And that we've discussed. We haven't actually voted on the next step, which would be, what do we do next?
No, no.
We voted to have a
Read the
discussion.
Motion was very clear.
We have not voted on the motion.
What did we vote on?
We voted
Opening
on
it up.
having a discussion.
Opening it up to discussion.
No, you asked me to read it. I read it. And we voted.
The first vote that we had was to open the closed vote that we had 2 weeks ago, or whatever time ago.
I concur.
We had to open that to have
Okay.
this discussion.
Okay.
And then you had your point of view of what you wanted done.
Good.
And we were told that it is out of the scope of work that we've been brought to the room for. But we were also told that you could, and we could, as a committee, make a recommendation that we feel this is important and should be reconsidered at a later date with a different committee with that scope of work after the city has budgeted for that. And any staff member can jump in if I'm wrong.
Denise, I think you recaptured it well.
That's my understanding.
Right, so shall we ask the question?
I'll call for the question. I don't like to do it because I can't say the word question.
Doug, or excuse me, Brett, Doug recommended that we do a roll call vote.
Yes.
But what is the question again?
Well, actually, we probably will need to make a new motion, right? Because we'll have to go back. We reopened it. I don't know, Doug, what do we do?
Technically, following the broader version of Robert's rules, is that you had a motion to open it up to have the discussion. Now what you need is a specific motion that would get to Leonard's material that was provided to you. Do you want us to go through basically steps 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Someone would need to make that motion.
I think we're going to need to go back and look at the minutes because I read what I wanted. And we voted.
We did not.
We did not vote on the motion. We voted on calling the motion for discussion.
I agree.
What was the purpose of me reading it?
Because that's what you wanted to add.
That was what we want. That was
That
what
was
you
your
wanted
discussion.
to open up to discussion.
No, my motion was made in writing to the committee on a letter that I have dated the 7th of December. So I made the motion in writing. And
It's my understanding that from what I understand, the motion needed to be made on record, verbally on record, and to be able to open up to discussion. And that was the first vote that we took. Now there needs to be, Doug, did you say that there needs to be a motion to vote on Leonard's suggestion?
My
clarify?
guidance to you would be a motion to respond to Leonard's language that is written in his letter that was sent to the committee, that to address items 1, 2, 3, and 4.
so I made you reopened the hearing I read my motion. Is there a second?
There was a second to reopen it. I don't think we need to keep going over this
Okay.
because if we call the motion right now, I say vote no so we can get on with our business because we've been pissing around for 45 minutes getting absolutely nothing done.
Sure.
So if there
Oh,
is
I'm
no,
muted, sorry. Hearing,
I would entertain the motion to table this discussion, gather more information before our next CAC. We do not need to have the 2 foot or 85% at this point in time to move forward. And maybe we could get Leonard and the rest of us some of the information that Leonard, what he asked there, I think is beyond some of the things that I would be comfortable asking the city to do. Like number 3, definitely not. Number 2, I don't think, you'd have to go back to the 2018 plan. Recommendations, though, I would be in favor of actually having recommendations in writing from the 4 designated in number 4. But I don't think it's really that big of issue. When I look at what at the end of Emily's presentation, there's next steps, evaluate.
Oh, Pete, can I stop you for a second?
Bill?
Bill, can you turn your audio off, please? It's causing feedback. Thank you.
We don't need a decision at this point in time, do we?
Let me jump in here for a minute really quick, if I can, Madam Chair. So in order to provide a list of projects, we do need a decision because that determines what the projects are. If we don't have a threshold for when there's an issue and when a project is necessary, we don't have a way to provide you with a list of what those projects may or may not be.
I'm going to jump in and say, I'll make a motion that we decide today about, and we could put a rider on if we need to or whatever, but that we go ahead and decide on those which threshold we think we would like to nominate as a recommendation, because we're obviously not making the final decision, it's as a recommendation. And that, and we do that as one item, and then we address the rest of Leonard's letter as another item. So I make a motion that we decided, are we going to return to the 2 foot, I think that's what it was. I can't remember now. Decision or would we nominate something else? So, because that was what this discussion was supposed to be about, I thought, was initially was whether or not we wanted to discuss the decision we made last time. So my motion
so
is.
Connie, are you making a motion?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
So yeah, that we having heard the discussion and understanding that there are many issues to consider in this, but for the benefit of moving forward, that we vote or vote on which threshold we view as a recommendation that will go to the city. And of the 4, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Of those four, I'm not great at 8 o'clock and I can't even remember what they are. So 2 foot for me, but yeah, so I'd like to put that motion forward.
Connie, I might suggest a little clarity.
Yeah.
Because your motion is to effectively have a discussion about what the threshold would be. It might be prudent to say, if you have a particular threshold you think is acceptable, is put that on the table for the rest of the committee to respond to.
We return to that I make a motion that we say 2 foot, the 2 foot threshold. My apologies for not being clearer.
We're here to try to help.
I second the motion. Can we also add the suggestion, Doug, that you made, which is that this threshold is still an issue of concern, may need it, maybe the staff needs to come back to it and further evaluate?
You could make a friendly second if if Connie agrees to that, then that could be added.
I absolutely agree.
Did you not? She agreed to your
Yep.
second.
Did you not hear me?
I think Meryl might be frozen.
Oh.
Disney movie moment. She's frozen.
At least she doesn't have a terrible look on her face. That's my
Yeah.
biggest fear.
So what Meryl did was she had a friendly second to add back
Amendment. She had a friendly
friendly
amendment.
amendment to add the issue about it is an issue to look at the 2.5 foot threshold and come back and address that issue later. Summary. And if Connie, if you agreed with that, you just have to acknowledge it. I see a thumbs up.
That's it.
Then this would be the point for the chair to ask Brett to do a roll call vote.
So we're including Leonard's suggestions in a recommendation for further review at a later date.
Correct.
Thank you.
Can I think just a matter of order, I think that has to be a different motion, doesn't it?
Now, you had a motion, Meryl seconded, she proposed a friendly modification to that motion. If you agree to it, then both the person who made the original motion and who seconded it both agree, then it would be the time to go for the vote and do a roll call.
I think the clarification was, though, that the motion did not include addressing all of Leonard's pieces of the puzzle.
So just stepping aside from the motion part of it right now, I'm not suggesting that Leonard does not have valid considerations, and also that obviously the city has valid considerations in all this, but that the very specific issue of the 2 foot threshold, in the interest of actually being able to get something done in the next few months, is one thing. That and I share his concerns. I just probably think of them a little bit differently. I feel that there's more needed to be done by this group about setting, I'm trying to think how to put it, setting a purposeful agenda of how you can consider these kinds of issues. And I think that's Leonard's and maybe my frustration, just saying it different, and a few other people's frustration, is not having enough information to make good decisions is, frustrating, and that the more information you can get, the better. And that needs to maybe be a motion that, if not specifically maybe what Leonard's asking for, but and more generally that we're asking for more information so we can make better decisions in general. So
I understood the motion to include basically my item 4 with recommendations from the city engineer, public works director, development director. I'm not sure if I heard that there was a recommendation from the design consultants, but that would be good. But that's really what I was looking for, one of the main things.
My internet, I do not have a great connection, so I'm having a hard time understanding. But Connie, did you did you agree to the amendment that I made to your motion?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Brett, would you like to do a roll call vote?
Can you repeat the motion with the amendment then, please?
Leonard is asking for the motion, for clarity on the motion and the amendment.
So Connie made a motion that we maintain the 2-foot threshold level. My amendment is that we do that with amendment noting that this is an issue of concern and that staff may need to come back and further evaluate this decision.
Okay.
Would you like to do the roll call vote?
We will. Bill Rourke,
Aye.
Connie Woodbury,
Yes.
Denise Bacon,
Yes.
Jeremiah Horton,
Yes.
Leonard Rydell,
Yes.
Merrill Kunkel,
Yes.
Mike Gugler,
Yes.
Peter Sedaris.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor? We will maintain the 2-foot below threshold, or excuse me, 2 foot below threshold level. Okay, on to the next issue in old business. Leonard, you in your email said that it was let me see what the date was. On the 4th of January, you spoke to, excuse me, a list of committee members providing each member email address and phone number in which they can be contacted by committee members. It's my understanding that personal emails we cannot give out personal emails regarding just because of public meeting laws. Also, we don't want to unintentionally create a quorum. Leonard, you said you would drop the motion if member comments are forwarded on. Brett and Doug, is this happening?
Yes.
Yeah, let me kind of step in here. So I think this is always important to remind, and I remind all of the committees I work with, is that you are a public body. You are governed by state laws. You are governed by and under the Oregon ethics laws that exist. You act as a public body in a public setting where the public can participate. We happen to be doing it by Zoom these days. So your conversations need to be open to the public to be able to hear what those are. So, yeah, I can go back 35 years ago and think about how things were done, but the City of Newburgh is transparent in our discussions amongst our commissions, our committees, and our city council. We do have your city email accounts. There could be issues or concerns that come up of individuals having offline conversations that the public is not aware of. And so those conversations need to occur when we hold our meetings. Yes, any of you can submit comments, issues, concerns directly to Brett, and those will be shared with the entire committee and have the opportunity to discuss those when we have our meetings.
I have been very pleased with Brett in that he has been forwarding my emails and letters to all members of the commission. So I am happy with this situation as it's currently working.
Okay, so you do not have a motion regarding that then?
No.
Okay, so the next piece of old business then is looking at the December 17th Leonard regarding recommendations to the storm drainage master plan. Remember that we have opportunity to make these recommendations now, but it's not a final decision, and we still have the opportunity to make recommendations at the next meeting as well. Shall we move on to those recommendations, Leonard?
I gotta look up my letter.
Okay, while you're looking up your letter, are there any other recommendations from the committee regarding the storm drainage master plan that want to be made now, or they can always, as I remember from what Brett said, can be emailed to Brett as well?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have your letter, Leonard?
Not yet.
Okay. Right, so just in the interest of time, I'm going to read a little bit of what it looks like your recommendations say, if that's okay with you.
Was it a letter or an email? I tried to print out everything before this meeting, so I apologize.
It's Leonard, it's your letter dated January 4th on the second page that starts off with my third concern.
I can send it back to you if you wish.
I think we're actually referring to
I
the
think, yeah,
the storm drainage plan recommendations is the other item, and that's in the agenda packet. That's the letter of December 17th.
December 17th is the letter that I was speaking on. Yeah, thank you, Brett. Which, as I understand it, has recommendations for the storm drainage master plan in terms of water infiltration. So minimizing impervious surfaces and retaining stormwater on site. Recommending that your recommendation, as I'm reading it, Leonard, is that all commercial parking lots be designed using pavers for stormwater infiltration. Rain infiltration gardens shall be preferred method of stormwater management and water quality treatment. Narrow residential streets, remove bicycle lanes from between the curbs, use separate or combination bicycle pedestrian ways, and then revise zoning standards to allow more dense development, to reduce demand for expansion and annexation of our underdeveloped land around Newburgh. I think that when we are having this discussion and recommendations for our stormwater master plan, that we also think of the scope of this group and the scope of what is feasible for this committee. So Leonard, would you like to talk about your recommendations further?
Yeah, the copy I have on my computer I didn't realize I had sent it out, but we're keeping our stormwater flows to historic level. What we aren't doing is having the historic flow at a certain rate period of time stay the same. So it's like if you get hit on the arm one or twice, it doesn't hurt. But if you get hit on the arm for about 10 or 15 times, you're going to get black and blue. And our stormwater code does not recognize the fact that we're not controlling total runoff. We're only controlling the rate of runoff. And we have nothing in our standards to really reduce the total runoff or to even try and keep the total runoff to pre-development conditions. And there's several methods you can do it. One is you stop creating new impervious area. And there's several ways of doing it. One is you have narrower streets, you have smaller cul-de-sacs, and the letter I was going to refer to, I was going to send, is I was going to send it prior to the next meeting. So I think we should have narrower street standards for some streets. Our parking lots should be pavers, and eliminating or maintaining total runoff from a site should be a standard that we should include in the revised stormwater code, because that's a preferred and historical method. And so this
Leonard,
yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
And so this would require not only changes to our stormwater plan, but also the stormwater plan should also suggest that we change our standards of development codes. And so I'm going to be sending that letter probably within the next week or so, that has more examples and is more polished. So
then if you will be receiving a letter from you in the next couple weeks, then could we table this discussion for the next meeting so that we might have a better idea of your letter and recommendations and have an opportunity to discuss that in depth further?
That would be perfect.
Okay. All right, so then let us move on to the staff memo. Brett, is that you?
Yes, and that's just kind of some information to identify it, as Leonard was pointing out, some of the recommendations that can come out of this group or to be included in the stormwater master plan could have implications into other areas. And that memo is basically to provide a little bit of background of the things that when we're looking at things that are going to change, what other entities, organizations do we need to look at, including making certain that we're staying in compliance with any state or federal laws as well. So that's what that memo is. So it's kind of more of some informational information. If there's any specific questions on that, we can discuss those.
Well, if I'm understanding you, that it is within the scope of this committee to maybe not be as specific as Leonard is suggesting, but that we can make recommendations on a larger issues and direction for water in Newburgh than just, let's just say, just the size of threshold of pipes and things like that.
Correct. Yes, part of the stormwater master plan. In fact, that's one of the things that the consultant is tasked with, is to make some recommendations on what are some areas to be changed in stormwater treatment or other elements. And as they're kind of looking at, that's a task that they're on, and they're working on that right now. So, we'll be seeing some of that shortly. And so, yeah, definitely the group can provide some additional recommendations, and those will be stated in as recommendations from the CAC within that document is what we're working on structuring.
I, for one, would find it really useful to be able to, and even if it's possible on the agenda, to deal with the pragmatics of the role of this committee, the sewage line thresholds being one of them, and to look at the larger area of direction. And I call it policy. I don't know if that's the correct term for this, but the policy that the city might take about how it's going to deal with water in general in the future. So, but because it seems to me a lot of the frustration we're having is we're trying to put those two things together, and they are very differently separate. So, because one is a long term and one is a now. So is it possible for us to do that with the agenda? And that might assist Leonard to get some of his, discussion going, but we can also get on with the work that we need to do for you.
I may not be understanding the question. I think it's kind of where we set the agenda up with this item was an item that came from council to kind of go on to that discussion, or to the committee that Leonard had sent on, is put in the agenda as kind of that old business component.
Okay, so we're,
Anticipation is that yeah, and so as other committee members, if you have recommendations or things that go in there, send those to an item, as an item to me, and we'll incorporate that into the agenda for discussion.
thank you.
But there will be an opportunity, as I understand, Brett, to talk about final recommendations at the next meeting, correct?
Yes.
The final
yes.
recommendations, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have, at least one more meeting there, so.
Okay. Any further questions about the memo? All right, let's move on to public comments. Are there any public comments?
I had not received any public comments, and I see no other public on the call.
Okay. Any items from staff?
One, there was with the cybersecurity training. I'm not certain if memos or the links to that training has gone out yet. I know that there's some issues of getting that out to some of the members. So has anyone received those as yet?
I took it a long time, like
Yeah.
weeks ago, and
Okay.
not as council, but it must have been for this because I'd already done it for council
Okay.
once last year.
Yep.
So
Okay.
I got it and did it.
Yep, back in December. Yeah, that was when most of those were gone, and there were some of the members, and some of those did not get the notices on that based upon the timing of where they got on the committee. So
I think I got mine on the 4th of January.
okay, yep, just want to check on that because I knew that there were some questions on that as to whether those have been received or not. So and that should
I
give
got
you
mine as well.
complete.
The biggest question is how to stay awake while you finish it.
I actually got it again, and I was like, no way.
Kind of like a Zoom Sominex.
I would need that link, please.
Okay, Peter, you have not seen that one?
Not that I know.
Security. Okay.
Peter, I'm sorry, Peter, but that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
You should have just stayed quiet.
It's just 2 hours of your life.
It doesn't come from the city of Newburgh, right? It comes from
Right. It comes from the vendor that I
the vendor, and I'm looking
right.
for it.
No before.
No
No
before.
before. Yeah.
When it all goes wrong, we'll be glad that we did it.
It's actually there's some very useful information in there that even for your everyday life and using your computer that you would find beneficial.
All right, are there any items from committee members? No. Okay, hearing none, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Raise your hand.
Bye-bye.
Looks like we got it.
Looks like it's unanimous. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you all.